The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 200
for your patience.
The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We can and we must work
all of our
together.
colleagues,
The future of
both permanent representatives, all other delegates, particularly the chair of the Committee on Hemispheric Security, Gustavo Adriansen, Ambassador Adriansen of Peru, the observer missions, the panelists, the secretary. Welcome to this joint meeting of the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs and the Committee on Hemispheric Security to consider challenges posed by emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems when it comes to compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law. Before getting into the topics, let me ask the Secretariat if we have a quorum. Thank you, Chair. We do indeed have the necessary quorum. Thank you very much, Alejandro. To begin, let's recall that preparing this special session, the permanent commissions of Costa Rica and Mexico shared with all the delegations a concept note, which was distributed document CP/CAJP 3761/26, and then the draft agenda was submitted by Mexico, approved by the CAJP at a regular meeting of 19 October, and on November 2nd as well, and it was distributed CP/CAJP 3762/23. It should be noted that the General Assembly Resolution International Law adopted last 23 June, in that we, the member states, adopted the following mandate, and I quote, to ask the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs and the Committee on Hemispheric Security to hold before the 54th regular session of the General Assembly a joint session to reflect on the challenges posed by emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems in terms of compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law, and to ask the Department of International Law to prepare a report on the results of said session. With that objective in mind, and that I close quote, with that objective in mind, we are accompanied today by panelists from the governments, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the United Nations, civil society, academia, and delegations of the member states. As chair of the committee, we hope that this is a productive session, and we look forward to the report from the Department of International Law. We ask that all the texts and presentations be put to that department or the Secretariat of the CAJP. We appreciate Costa Rica and Mexico for the initiative to pull together this meeting, and we now look forward to having this dialogue in light of the importance of this topic for international law, peace, and security. We remind each panelist that you have 7 minutes maximum for your presentation, as you know. So if you go beyond that time, I will be obligated to cut you off. So without more, we now introduce Romina Soledad Morello. She's legal advisor for the Americas of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Now, Ms. Morello, I understand you're online, and you now have 7 minutes. Thank you very much. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, of course, I'd like to thank the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs and the Committee on Hemispheric Security for holding this joint session to reflect on the challenges imposed by emerging technologies and automatic weapon systems when it comes to complying with international law, including IHL, International Humanitarian Law. For us, the International Committee of the Red Cross, well, we are encouraged by the holding of this joint session, which will address one of the greatest humanitarian concerns for the future of armed conflicts. Through our work on the ground around the world, we are witnesses of the use of weapon systems with ever more autonomous functions. We know that with an update of the software or a simple change in military doctrine, many of the remotely controlled weapons that are now used, be these drones or armed robots, can become autonomous weapons. Before mentioning some of the humanitarian, ethical, and legal challenges posed by such weapons, I'd like to share with you what we consider to be an autonomous weapon system. For the ICRC, these are weapons which, after they're initially created, select and apply force directed at targets without human intervention. That is to say that weapons of this sort are activated by their environment based on a target profile. This definition is not based on the level of sophistication of the technology used. It includes autonomous weapon system controlled by artificial intelligence and automatic learning, but it's not limited to them. The key characteristic is that the user of an autonomous weapon system does not select the specific target, place, or specific time at which the attack will be carried out. This unforeseeability poses a series of concerns. First, humanitarian concerns around the greater risk of harm posed to certain persons or objects. Then there are ethical problems having to do with the lack of human agency. And third, legal challenges in the context of international humanitarian law. Mindful of our audience and your level of expertise, I will refer to these last challenges. As we know, international humanitarian law prohibits indiscriminate attacks. That is to say, attacks that are not directed at specific military targets, that use means or methods of combat that cannot be directed to specific military targets, or that cannot be limited as required by international humanitarian law. As I mentioned earlier, autonomous weapon systems are not actually directed at a specific military target, but rather are activated based on a generalized target profile. At the same time, we are also facing the black box effect, that is to say, the incapacity of a human being, the inability to understand like a human being would be, and thereby be able to predict the result of activating such weapons. I was surprised to find out that in many cases, the very developer of the weapon cannot actually fully explain or apply reverse engineering to the actions of the AI algorithms. The functioning has become so complex and so opaque that we humans are unable to understand how the variables were correlated or related together or combined to produce the final result. The non-human cannot reasonably determine whether the weapon is directed against a specific military target or whether its effect can actually be limited. Therefore, it's not able to assess legality of its use in keeping with the norms of international humanitarian law. And that's why, in the opinion of the ICRC, we have legally binding rules that prohibit unpredictable automatic weapons. Equally important is the prohibition on automatic weapons designed or used to directly attack human beings. From an ethical standpoint, autonomous anti-personnel weapons are unacceptable. At the same time, they undermine human agency, the human agency of those who make use of force, and the human dignity of those against whom the force is used. But from a legal standpoint, for us, it is difficult to imagine realistic combat situations in which the use of automatic weapons against persons would not entail a significant risk of violations of international humanitarian law. These two measures that I've just mentioned should be accompanied by strict regulations regarding the design of use of other autonomous weapons. For example, using them only against military targets that are clearly defined as such, such as missiles, tanks, military airplanes, or situations in which there are no civilians, or with restrictions on geographic scope, duration, or the scale of their use, thus guaranteeing at the same time effective human supervision, timely intervention, and deactivation if necessary. We don't need to look too deeply into our experience to know that the harm caused civilians by weapons whose effects cannot be adequately controlled are of a great scale. Indeed, this has been one of the major humanitarian impetus behind restrictions and prohibition on certain conventional weapons. Many states that you represent have played an essential role in the processes that have been promoted as a matter of humanitarian considerations when it comes to establishing the prohibitions and restrictions necessary on weapons and their transfer, whether it's the treaty on nuclear weapons or on commercial weapons, or conventional weapons rather. Autonomous weapons in conflicts are not just a question for tomorrow. Today, they are an urgent humanitarian priority. What is needed is political leadership based on principles so as to effectively address these concerns internationally. And we need to come up with an effective response. In this regard, we see that the states of the Americas have an important role to play. As legal advisor to the ICRC for the region, I followed very closely the numerous events that have happened this year, from the communique of Bethlehem to the communication of the OAS General Assembly, the communication of the Central American Parliament, the Central American Integration System, as well as the recent statement by the CARICOM states. All of these efforts show the commitment and leadership of the countries of the region when it comes to addressing humanitarian, legal, and ethical concerns posed by autonomous weapons. To conclude, I'd like to say that the ICRC trusts that the states will find the way to come up with an effective international response to automatic weapon systems that is up to the very serious humanitarian concerns they raise, negotiating and adopting a legally binding instrument on autonomous weapons. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morello. It's always a pleasure to have you join us here at our meeting. Next, let's move on to the central panel of this meeting, and I give the floor to Ambassador Adrian Sim, who's the chair of the Committee on Hemispheric Security. You have the floor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Sebastian, thank you for giving me the floor. It is particularly gratifying to me to hold this joint meeting with the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs, particularly to deal with a topic that's of such importance to the region. Next, we are going to kick off the panel on challenges posed by emerging technologies and autonomous weapons systems in terms of compliance with international law and the links to international security. For this purpose, let us move on and welcome the members of the panel. Again, challenges posed by emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems in terms of compliance with international law and the links to international security. With Jimena Viveras Alvarez, member of the UN High-Level Advisory Body on Artificial Intelligence. Wanda Munoz, Senior Consultant in Humanitarian Disarmament and Human Rights. And Professor Bernard Dwine of the University of Quebec, as well as Maria Pia Devoto, Latin American Caribbean Human Security and Network. Ivan Marcas, the Secretary of the Multi-Dimensional Security of the OAS. Ivan Marquez, we give you the floor. Thank you very much, Chair, Ambassador, and to each and every one of you. It's a pleasure to me to be here taking part in this joint meeting of the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs and the Committee on Hemispheric Security. I'm grateful to both committees for this initiative to bring this topic up before the OAS. It's been a topic before the General Assembly in the past, and I'm glad that it's been included in this debate, and it's been brought up at other multilateral forums. And I believe, as the first panelist said, this is a topic of the future, as she said, and it's something that's so relevant in the present time. So together with environmental crimes and artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons is one of the most consequential and novel threats to peace in our times. And I also hail the initiative by Costa Rica and Mexico bringing this topic in. Without further ado, bringing up this comment, I'd like to provide the opportunity to our specialist panelists to begin their discussion on. We have excellent people who will provide the latest on international humanitarian law, ethics, and the use of these tools, as well as an updating on negotiations and discussions and other forums and what they're doing on this topic. And now that said, I'd like to give the floor immediately to our first speaker today, who Ambassador Aklarovich said each panelist has 7 minutes sharp, and we will have to allow for more discussion among the ambassadors. So let's give Jimena Viveros the floor, who is currently a member of the United Nations High-Level Advisory Body on Artificial Intelligence of the UN Secretary General, who are entrusted, this body, to deal with the international governance on international intelligence. She's also the coordinator of Loreto Ortiz of the Supreme Court of Justice, to Supreme Court Justice, and also is a member of the Federal Council of her country. She has a long career in international forum, and in Yugoslavia and Rwanda's courts, tribunals, and dealings with the FARC issue in Mexico. She's been in the Secretariat of Citizen Security and also in the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation, playing the General Director's position, holding this. And so your microphone is now on. Ms. Viveros Alvarez, you have the floor. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everybody who's listening to us. First, I'd like to thank the OAS and the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs and the Committee on Hemispheric Security for this. But in the first minutes, I'm going to try to explain all the challenges that I believe are present. Perhaps the most important one that we must raise is that we must delegate decision-making about life and death decisions with regard to the life of a machine. A robot isn't only capable of taking someone's life away, but also it's a violation of human dignity as well. And so with regard to this point, the first committee of the UN approved in the beginning of this month a draft resolution about lethal autonomous weapons resolution, and it was established that an algorithm should not have total control over decisions to take the lives away from people. And with the advances in artificial intelligence, we're endowing greater machines with greater power. These were powers that a human being would have to exercise, but now it's being delegated to machines. This is so concerning, particularly in military settings, specifically with regard to autonomous weapons. Without unregulated use, undermines the rule-based system of international humanitarian law, particularly with regard to proportionality, need, and precautionary principle. This is not something that we can just label under the fact that autonomous weapons are something of the future. That's not true. They're here right now. Well, let us remember that the report on the experts on living in March of 2021 identified the use of these STM and other ammunition were programmed to target the operators, and in other words, the capacity to just shoot and forget. And these facts prove that these weapons are a reality that we can't hide from or ignore. The use of artificial intelligence in military settings only exacerbates the problems that arise in such settings. The use of automatic machine learning can make it possible for the machine to imitate what a human being does. It does things, and learning to do so based on the experience. And based on experience, because thanks to these processes, an autonomous system can adapt to new surroundings and any situation to be able to meet its goals, despite any obstacle that human beings cannot face and so or overcome. So not only do we know what reasons that a machine makes a decision, so it analyzes situations. The decision process is so complex that it's been compared to a black box as the problem is known. And so it's a problem. We don't know what the rationalization of shooting so the black box issue is of greater concern because it jeopardizes lives. It makes it possible for these weapons are unpredictable and erratic. The International Committee of the Red Cross has said that it can lead to international humanitarian law violations. The different degrees of autonomy that these systems can have entail different risks. The most risky are those that are autonomous, that take their own decisions on critical decisions about targeting and deciding whether to shoot or not. Thus, the loss of human control over the use of force should lead us to question whether machines could make value judgments in the midst of the chaos of the battlefield. In the heat of battle, it is very unlikely that they'll be able to do it. And no matter how sophisticated these machines become, it's so complicated, if not impossible, for a machine to adequately apply the cardinal principles of international humanitarian law. We must be aware of the lack of predictability and biases in aligning artificial intelligence with what is right, and to apply it. This becomes even more dangerous with autonomous systems. Now, these biases are inherent to artificial intelligence, which can lead to violations of proportionality, distinction, and precaution. Because of these biases in the systems of recognition, an autonomous weapon system could target civilians and destroy them and kill them. And so, in view of the problems of aligning artificial intelligence and the complexity of these situations and the rules of combat, of engagement and interpretation thereof, it could be that the machine, to meet its goal, it acts against law unlawfully. And so, and not taking into account human suffering, an autonomous system could decide to just kill somebody. And for an abundance of caution, there was a very troubling issue that artificial intelligence attacked its operator. So what it was doing is it was supposed to be independently identify missiles and target them and destroy them, but that artificial intelligence viewed the operator as an obstacle, and so it decided to terminate the operator. Even though this setback was just a simulation, this reflects the major issues that can emerge from these errors of aligning artificial intelligence with these weapons. It's even more concerning if we consider the thousands of unpredictable things that situations that arise in an armed conflict. It could asymmetric tactics should be used in taking hostages, for example, or hide among the civilian population, or violating international humanitarian law. That if the main target is to eliminate the members of another group, it could completely ignore the civilian population, kill them to be able to meet its objective, and a hospital could be attacked as well, where civilians are. And so this leads to gross international humanitarian law violations. This leads to liability when totally autonomous systems are used, and its conduct leads to physical and material damage to third parties. But a human being, there's no one to attribute responsibility, ascribe liability to when it's autonomous. And so, what happens if technologies cause damage? Who's liable? What type of liability can be indicated here? That's what the questions we should ask. So we have to realize that these autonomous weapon systems could cause serious violations of international humanitarian law. We must ensure that there is a possibility for international criminal law to be ascribed. However, it's highly complex because autonomousness does not create a cause and effect nexus. And so it's very hard and complex and hard to follow. And so many people think that international humanitarian law, but it does regulate these autonomous systems. But Ms. Jimena, I would like for you to wrap up, please. Now your time is coming to an end. So I just want to remind you all that Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, has said in his agenda for Peace 2023, it's called on the states that 2026 to come up with a legally binding instrument to regulate these autonomous weapon systems, to control, and so that there's human control of them, and as well as those that don't comply with international humanitarian law principles. So I would like to urge you all to continue to participate and collaborate with the purposes of international peace and security in our region. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Jimena Viveros, for your presentation. And I'd like to underscore a few interesting points that you brought up at the beginning with regard to the draft resolution that was recently discussed before the UN General Assembly and introduced at the committee at the beginning of the first half of the year with regard to autonomous lethal weapons. I underscore from this first presentation that quite an important issue with regard to the ethical and moral decision delegated with regard to the use of force by a machine, and about liability when this is the case. And it's very complex. And next, let's move on in our panel discussion. I'd like to call on our second panelist who joins us today, also virtually. I'd like to introduce Dr. Wanda Munoz, who's a senior consultant in humanitarian disarmament and human rights and artificial intelligence. She's part of the feminist network of research on artificial intelligence, and she's published extensively on the challenges posed by autonomous weapon system and the ICRC and UNESCO. She's done extensive work for, and she's worked for the Global Alliance on International Artificial Intelligence. In 2020, she was recognized for her initiative, women's initiatives, as peace builders working for peace and equality, and by the UNDIREC as one of the women who is a motor engine for change with regard to disarmament and nuclear proliferation in Latin America. So you have 7 minutes, Ms. Munoz. Good afternoon. And I thank you for the invitation to this important meeting. There's 3 elements that I want to talk about to show that that we must commit to that are politically binding instruments with regard to the use of force. I'm going to begin with ethics, which is of the undeniable importance of the artificial intelligence ethics that UNESCO has adopted. And so that decisions have a reversible effect of life and death must be made by a human, not a machine. And so this commitment in and of itself should bring us to negotiate a treaty on autonomous weapons, and then codes of conduct, declarations, or any other instrument, non-binding instruments are inadequate to be able to fix this problem. They're not binding, they're not enforceable, and they don't involve accountability mechanisms. So an issue of this magnitude, using non-binding instruments, it's just not possible, and we need to show our willingness to actually come up with these binding instruments. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the risks of emerging technologies and with regard to the possible consequence of these technologies in the military settings. So there was, we don't know what, many say that we don't know what the impact of these weapons are, but that's not true. These technologies entail not only risks, but they've already caused damage in a disproportionate way in our region. Afro-descendants, women, and persons with disability, LGBTI plus, and indigenous people in these varied sectors have a deleterious effect on housing and health and education and other things. And so in military situations, in particular, we've seen that these autonomous weapons have violated human rights, and that and many courts have asserted that international humanitarian law is applicable in situations of conflict. So even though emerging technologies have a differentiated effect, the use of autonomous weapons are not equally applied. And those who say it's not necessary to negotiate these are those who have less of a risk of being affected by these symptoms. They're not but there are many who would be more likely impacted, and so that makes it harder to gain access to justice in these situations where these technologies are used. Thirdly, I must mention the risks of international security, which is fragile as it is right now. Conflicts in different contexts show that technologies in armament there's no justice and equality, puts many groups at a disadvantage. And so we must invest in programs and technology that contribute to peace, justice, and autonomous weapons have a lower threshold than other weapons, conventional weapons. And so it makes it very difficult, there's the nature of these, to deal with them. And so it can have such a high number of people who are affected by these autonomous weapon systems. And non-state actors are able to use them too. And so it's so difficult to identify who these people are because they operate on their own. And so for these and other reasons that have been recognized by the Belém statement in CARICOM, I thank you for your commitment. We need to act urgently and as soon as possible, and not wait until there are further victims in the region to act. I would like to wrap up with these considerations with regard to these systems. The Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, the ACCW for its English acronym, but the truth is there hasn't been the results we've expected from this convention. There was a commitment passed to work on an instrument, but there's no specifics about the inferences. It's been two more years in Geneva. They're going to be negotiating this and trying to hash this out. I'll give you 3 examples of what happens. There's a lot of difficulties to come to an agreement, even with regard to the procedural rules, the participation of civil society and the ICR. See, it makes it difficult at these meetings in the Global South also, and most of the are not represented at the negotiations on this instrument, so it's not sufficient to say that the CAC is the forum where we're going to deal with this. We have to bring evidence into the picture. Now, however, it's not a gloomy outlook, but there is hope that we can continue with negotiations at that forum and have more countries take part and to make it more representative of most countries of the earth. And it's not, and we can't let it be frozen by a minority, and we must move forward in this process as we have done in other forums as well. To let more time go by is to enable these stalling tactics of many states to triumph. And that's not good for our population or our region, and it's not consistent with the OAS's motto, more rights for more people. With this development, this should be the main parameter to guide our decisions internationally in the region. So therefore, technical working groups can be organized by the OAS, so that with the rapporteurships and thematic rapporteurships to take part, for example, with regard to the humanitarian and human rights aspects, the marginalized groups, how they're effective, and ethics, etc. And we should also think about having a region that's free of autonomous weapons systems could be something we should think about. And regionally, international, where we're ready, willing, and able to work together with you on this and other issues in the region so that we rise to the occasion with regard to this. Historically, we've done so and with arms control and other issues. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Wanda Munoz, for your remarks. It was quite precise. Now, you've mentioned some very important topics you've raised, and the risks of emerging technology against when they're applied to civilians has been seen in different fields, and particularly groups that are socially discriminated against in our society, like women, Afro-descendants, LGBTQI+, and you raised an alert about the difficulties that have been posed by the available instruments in international forum, and that there has not been any steps forward to include autonomous weapons and artificial intelligence in these. And lastly, a very important point, that there's a need for the involvement of the producer countries of these technologies to come up with a solution in regulating this situation. And so now I'd like to give the floor to our third panelist today, who came from New York to Washington, D.C. to be here in person. I'd like to introduce you Maria Pia Devoto, who's the Director for Public Policies and a specialist in international security and non-proliferation disarmament against. And she's an active member of different civil society networks. She's the founder of the Argentina Network and the Caribbean, SELAC, and she's the coordinator of a governance organization, Stop Killer Robots campaign, among other. Maria Pia, you have the floor now. Thank you very much. We need a microphone on. There we go. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you very much for the invitation from Costa Rica to take part at this panel discussion. I'd like to chairs of the committees. It's wonderful to be here to reflect about emerging technologies, autonomous weapons, and compliance with international humanitarian law. There's no doubt that there are benefits of technology to daily life, but the risks as well that have been pointed out by the persons who have spoken before me with regard to the autonomous nature of these weapons and complying with international law and international human rights law. And also, as Professor Vivero has said, it's not the philosophical, ethical, moral factor about life and death decisions that should be left in the hands of a machine. But I want to gauge this further so that you see where we stand in these issues. This week is the second meeting of the states parties for the treaty of which is presided over by Mexico in the UN of nuclear weapons proliferation. And even though we see these latent and not so latent threats of the vertiginous pace of the development of artificial intelligence and cyber capacities introduce totally disruptive threats that we're not familiar with, like such as precision, massive attacks, and critical infrastructural attacks. A whole country without internet, without communication, without financial systems up and running, without healthcare systems, and with weapons. But once they're used, they have targets and they're totally autonomous. And this challenges the traditional vision that we've had thus far of nuclear weapons as the ultimate strategy. And this really changes things.
We're talking about these issues of international conflicts, international security, but what about at the national level? What happens domestically or locally? What happens if these kinds of weapons get into the hands of non-state actors? What happens if these kinds of weapons are used for policing work, for control, surveillance, border control? It's so important, and that is why a meeting such as this is so important, to make sure that we can understand what is this risk that we're experiencing without limiting ourselves to conflict situations, to think about what, well, they're not so developed in our region yet, but we need to know what might be the risks that such weapon systems pose in our region. That is why the colleague from the ICRC said prohibition of certain types of weapons, there should always be significant human control. Their use needs to be restricted in terms of time and space. It's not any accident that the first forum in which attention was drawn to the legal and ethical implications of robotics in war has been the Security Council, and that was in 2010. In 2010, as from 2010, and before that, international actors in the scientific and academic communities, experts, some countries, some organizations. The Stop Killer Robots campaign was founded in 2012, and these different actors began to build up momentum in the multilateral arena. And formal discussions began in the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which was referred to by the previous presenter. That is a umbrella convention, and a discussion began there and have been ongoing for several years. Agreements have been reached, points of a consensus have been reached. Now there's a new mandate so as to discuss it. Well, this is for discussions in 2025, 2024. My country, Argentina, is presiding over it. But the problem of this convention on certain nuclear or in certain conventional weapon systems, you need to look at decision-making, and decisions are reached by consensus. So we talk about the dictatorship of the veto. There's one country, particularly if there's important countries, that if there's one country that opposes going forward, then we have no agreement. So we really need to generate a critical mass of countries that give impetus to the negotiation until such time as the international community reaches that point of non-return, that moment when one must act and when one must do something. And I believe that these discussions and having brought the issue to the OAS is part of building such momentum. And of course, you know, based on your own experience, that oftentimes it's easier to reach regional or sub-regional agreements than global agreements, and that is the spirit with which Costa Rica is organized the Conference on the Social and Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons in February of this year, which resulted in the Communiqué of Belém, which went to an international foreign ministers meeting, the Ibero-American meeting, which drew in Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. We have this regional effort at the OAS. There are other efforts as well. There's going to be a conference in Sierra Leone. There was a conference very recently in the Caribbean. The Interparliamentary Union is going to adopt at its General Assembly a resolution on this topic, and so this topic will be taken to all national legislatures. Then in October, reference was made that in the first committee, a resolution was adopted where the Secretary General asked the Secretary General of the United Nations to consult the different views of the countries on this issue. And so a very specific issue comes up here, and a request that I wanted to put to you, because the Secretary General consulted not only with the countries, but I think this is an opportunity for the committees to be part of this consultation by the UN Secretary General and be able to share in this framework the viewpoints that the committees have. Some countries could come to agreement on this issue so as to be able to collaborate in building the momentum that will no doubt lead us to a legally binding instrument to regulate such weapons. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria Pia, for your words and calling on this organization to become involved in that process. What you have said is very important in terms of the practical implications of looking at the potential for attacks on civilian infrastructure and the possible impacts beyond war, particularly on human rights, and the difficulties in moving these negotiations forward in the UN system, and how different regional and sub-regional organizations and systems can call for going forward in addressing this problem. I would now like to invite the last speaker for this panel to give us his presentation. This will be virtual. We have here our next panelist is a research associate at the Academy in Geneva and the Commission of, well, he's a member of the International Commission of Jurists. He has been a member of the UN Working Group on victims of enforced disappearance. He is also a member of the Trudeau Foundation, among others, and a visiting professor and member of the European Institute, Harvard, at New York University Law School, and University of San Martin in Palermo in Argentina, University of Paris too, and in Marseille, and University of Marseille in France. He has he's contributed to the promotion and defense of human rights from 1996, representing victims before international forums and quasi-judicial institutions. Professor Duhem is a senior advisor of the Quebec Bar Association in Canada. Professor Duhem, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I prepared my remarks in English.
Grateful to address today the development of autonomous weapons systems and principles of international humanitarian and human rights law. To start, one should note that there is a great variety of autonomous weapon systems, or OAS, with different characteristics, capabilities, and functions. In addition, systems that were not designed to be autonomous can be retrofitted to have some level of autonomy. Of course, this complicates greatly our understanding of the different levels of human control that are at play, in the loop, on the loop, or out of the loop, as is commonly said, depending on whether the autonomous weapons delivers force only with human command, under oversight of a human who can override the action, or whether it can function without human input. While autonomy is, in a general sense, dealing with an enabling function in a technology, it also relates to the actual ability of a system to exercise control over its own behavior and deal with uncertainties in its operating environment. Systems which respond to stimuli or uncertainties with simple pre-programmed responses are often considered as automatic, while those whose response is more complicated considered autonomous. Today, OWLs are heavily dependent on the data sets that they consider and are underpinned by the ability to acquire data via sensors and to process that data digitally with software. Machine learning systems may come to very different conclusions based on their data sets, which human operators may be unable to fully anticipate. It may also be difficult to predict how autonomous weapons using machine learning will have on the ground, especially if conditions arise in actions that were not foreseen in their development. This, of course, raises considerable worries as to the conformity of the use of such weapons with principles of international humanitarian and human rights law. Mr. President, regarding international humanitarian law, or IHL, let's consider two of its key principles, distinction and proportionality, both provided by treaty and customary international law. Firstly, distinction provides that parties to an armed conflict must distinguish between civilians or civilian objects and combatants or military objects, and of course, only target the latter. With the evolving nature of warfare from interstate to asymmetrical and non-international armed conflicts, a key challenge is to assess if Oz will be able to respect the principle distinguishing between civilians, persons rendered hors combat, and legitimate combatants. Distinguishing between such categories requires analysis which is highly complex and contextual, and whether ours are capable of such is debatable. Concerns in this respect include the problem of weak machine perception, which lies in the inability of sensor technologies to engage in value judgments and a highly complex process of differentiation between a civilian and a combatant. With newer forms of warfare, the problem gets further exacerbated as distinction is not restricted to identifying enemy uniforms or weapon systems, but requires also interpreting human behavior. Accurately detecting human sentiment in a combat situation, such as attempts to surrender, is still deeply unresolved as far as these systems are concerned. Another concern deals with the frame problem, which refers to the challenge to differentiate between relevant and irrelevant information required to analyze a situation on the battlefield. Indeed, in fast-paced modern warfare situations, Oz will be programmed to take decisions only based on what is relevant to the ongoing situation. However, this kind of programming could lead to situations where either Oz miss important information or information is incorrectly interpreted and thus might lead to indiscriminate attacks. Another series of concerns deal with the principle of proportionality, which prohibits an attack if the incidental civilian damage is excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated. Compliance with this principle requires a subjective assessment between potentially competing interests or in calculating whether civilian casualties exceed military advantages. Proportionality also requires anticipating alternative avenues of military engagements that minimize collateral damage, effects of potential decisions, and probable number of civilian casualties. The contextual and discretionary nature of this assessment and the absence of a clear metric for a proportionality analysis that could be used for an algorithm design are extremely worrisome. Given that proportionality doesn't have a clear-cut formula and that there is no agreement on what parameters constitute a prohibition of an excessive attack, coding them into software seems precarious. These principles are also relevant in human rights law, which prohibits the arbitrary deprivation of life. Indeed, public authority may use lethal force under rigorous conditions provided by law. It must be strictly necessary to save the life of another person or its self-defense, and this is a measure of last resort, which implies that there are no less lethal means of intervention, including, for example, negotiation, which of course ours would not be able to do. In addition, the criteria of proportionality requires that the amount of force used must be balanced with the seriousness of the offense and the legitimate objective that must be achieved from the honest perception of the law enforcement agent. As far as ours are concerned, in addition to the technical problems mentioned before, the complicated decision-making processes of such weapons make it extremely difficult to understand a posteriori this perception and judgment call made in the circumstances. This leads us to the last point regarding accountability. Both IHL and human rights law oblige states to investigate unlawful deprivation of life and to hold those who are responsible accountable. One issue of concern relates to the difficulty for human operating complex OWS to understand precisely why and how the machines take decisions at any given time, considering the immense quantity of information processed, the speed at which they function, and the framing problem mentioned before. Finally, the quantity of components and decision-making systems that operate together, and more specifically, how these components interact together in a specific instance, may be impossible to document or be in fact hidden from the human operator, which is sometimes called the black box problem mentioned by my colleagues previously. These render the human accountability exercise extremely difficult, if not impossible. This is, of course, exacerbated by the developing trend to use not only OWS independently, but by combining several units that operate together, commonly called swarms, where each unit is autonomous but coordinates its actions and decisions with those of other units, a little bit like a flock of birds moving as a single entity. Of course, these are all issues for which the debate is ongoing. And Mr. President, that is precisely the problem. The debate regarding the regulation of OWS is endlessly ongoing. While the international community seeks to address this threat, including the GGE, progress is terribly slow. The recent resolution of the UN General Assembly in November and the role played by the Secretary General are encouraging steps, but other international institutions need to step in and send a clear message. The OAS and its members should definitely be bold and continue to show leadership in this regard, not only by participating in the UN call for inputs, but also by urgently adopting a normative framework to address this situation. I thank you, Mr. President.
Muito obrigado,
Thank you very much, Professor Duhem, for your words, of which I highlight the principles involved in artificial intelligence, the question of proportionality, the difficulty of human accountability, which can be practically impossible, and noted, as noted by other panelists today as well, being we need to pay attention to the different kinds of artificial intelligence as well, as you've highlighted, and particularly the question of the principle of distinction between civilians and military, when that is a distinction drawn through human behavior. I also welcome your invitation for organizations such as the OAS to become involved in the debate and to play an active role promoting regulations of their own. With that, I'll conclude by giving the floor once again to Ambassador Adrien Sen. I thank you all for your words, especially the panelists who have accompanied us and who have enlightened us with their words. Thank you. As co-chair, I'd like to thank Secretary Ivan Marquez for moderating the main panel, and also the panelists who have participated for the time they have devoted to us. Particularly, I'd like to thank Jimena Alvarez, Wanda, Maria Pia, and Professor Bernard Duem, Maria Pia Devoto, and Wanda Munoz. And particularly, would like to thank the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs and the Committee on Hemispheric Security. And I now give the floor to Ambassador Ivan Kraktovich. This takes us to the fourth point, which is dialogue among the delegations of the member states. I remind you that we have a maximum 5 minutes for remarks, and we'll begin with the delegation of the United States. We invite all the delegations who wish to speak to ask for the floor.
United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The United States would like to thank the OAS for organizing this meeting. This has been a very busy year for multilateral activity on autonomous weapons systems, with OAS member states at the forefront of much of the work. The year began with the February conference on AWS for Latin American and Caribbean states hosted by Costa Rica, as others have mentioned. The United States participated as an observer, and we would like to thank Costa Rica again for hosting that meeting. In addition, we would like to express our deep appreciation to Ambassador Flavio Soares D'Amico of Brazil for his skillful chairmanship of the Group of Governmental Experts on Lethal Autonomous Weapons Systems, or LAWS GGE, over the last 2 years. The United States continues to believe that the LAWS GGE is the best opportunity to advance international efforts on laws, and we continue to engage substantively and constructively in the forum. It is uniquely suited to hold such discussions, given its focus on IHL and the participation of military, technical, legal, and policy expertise. While it is regrettable that Russia's obstruction at the CCW annual meeting earlier this month shortened the amount of time participants had for substantive debate, we were very glad CCW states parties were able to find consensus on a new ambitious mandate for the LAWS GGE. This mandate was made possible by the skillful leadership of the CCW chair, Ambassador Federico Villegas from Argentina, and we express our deep appreciation for those efforts. This new mandate, as others have alluded to, gives the GGE direction to formulate, by consensus, a set of elements for an instrument without prejudging its nature and other possible measures to address laws. Fulfilling this significant mandate realistically will require more than 1 year, and we welcome the flexibility to report to the CCW's 6th review conference, which will be in 2026. In order to make the most of this opportunity, GGE participants should begin thinking about how best to structure the GGE's work and build consensus. For the United States, one key part of that work will be to take into account proposals from CCW parties. Over the last 2 years, more than 15 substantive proposals were submitted to the GGE, ranging from legally binding instruments, such as a Protocol 6 to the CCW, to non-binding instruments to working papers. In particular, we believe the draft articles on autonomous weapons systems that we submitted in March of this year, along with Australia, Canada, Japan, Poland, the Republic of Korea, and the United Kingdom, represents a good starting point for formulating elements of an instrument. This proposal focuses on articulating measures to effectively implement IHL, including the cardinal principles of distinction, proportionality, and precautions that others have mentioned. We also very much appreciate the focus of the OAS International Law Resolution and this meeting on IHL. Detailed work on the application of IHL to laws should be a key part of fulfilling the GGE's mandate and would certainly be needed to be completed before any legally binding instrument could responsibly be negotiated. Now, Mr. Chair, in addition, we believe the draft UNGA resolution on laws, approved at the First Committee this October, could also make a valuable contribution. The United States worked collaboratively with Austria, the resolution's lead sponsor, to ensure the resolution strongly endorses the LAWS GGE and supports further work by that body. The UN Secretary General's report on the views of member states on laws, to be commissioned by the resolution, could bolster efforts to find common elements and measures that GGE participants can rally around. The United States was pleased to support the resolution in the First Committee and will vote to adopt it next month in the General Assembly. We believe the report should be balanced and inclusive of the views of all UN member states and encourage all OAS member states to contribute. We also welcome the opportunity for civil society to provide views. Lastly, I wanted to briefly mention one other important initiative. On November 13th of this year, the United States launched the Political Declaration on Responsible Military Use of Artificial Intelligence and Autonomy to create a foundation for an inclusive international dialogue on responsible development and deployment of AI capabilities in the military domain. The declaration affirms that military use of AI must be in compliance with applicable international law. The 47 states that have endorsed the declaration have committed to concrete, responsible practices and important steps towards transparency, and the declaration provides a basis for states to collaborate on shared technical challenges. We urge all OAS member states to seriously consider endorsing the declaration. We look forward to hearing the views of others today and are grateful for the opportunity to share our views. Thank you.
Gracias, Estados Unidos.
Thank you, United States. I now give the floor to Costa Rica. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. Special greetings to the hosts of today's session, Mr. Gustavo Adriansen, Ambassador and Chair of the Committee on Hemispheric Security, Ambassador Sebastian Kraklievich, who is Chair of the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs. Thank you for your valuable support in coordinating this joint session to reflect on the challenges posed by emerging technologies and automatic weapon systems when it comes to complying with international law. This is a topic that my country assigns great importance to. I begin by greeting the delegation of Mexico for having joined Costa Rica in leading work on this issue, which both delegations have given impetus to and whose mandate we co-sponsored, the resolution on international law in the resolution on international law at the last General Assembly. The initiative should be taken up by more member states of the entire region, including CARICOM. We also would like to acknowledge each of the panelists who've been with us and who've made valuable contributions, particularly Maria Pia Devoto, who did everything possible to accompany us in person today, and Professor Bernard Duhem of the University of Quebec. We thank you all for your contributions. Costa Rica's foreign policy accords priority to this new challenge, and proof of that is the holding in February of this year of the Latin American and Caribbean Conference on the social and humanitarian impact of automatic weapon systems. This is the first regional conference on the topic, and the results were set forth in the communique of Belém, which is the city in Costa Rica that hosted the meeting. With that, we reiterate a commitment to the search for multilateral solutions for greater well-being for the hemisphere and beyond the hemisphere. Like on many other topics, it is essential that we put the collective interest over the individual one. The new technologies should be used to promote unity, peace, equity, and human rights, and should not be automated artificial intelligence systems that would lead to conflicts. In addition, during the conference of the CARICOM states on the human impact of autonomous weapons, this was held last September and held in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, the permanent representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations, Ambassador Maritza Chan, expressed the need for the global community or the global South to address the importance of having frameworks negotiated within the UN context to regulate automatic weapon systems, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, drones, and other emerging technologies. On that occasion, Ambassador Chan recalled that automatic weapon systems not only threaten international humanitarian law in times of war, but also international human rights law in times of peace. It's necessary to find an international consensus on how to hold accountable both individuals and states for the unlawful use of these weapons that are not yet considered in international criminal law. We need to push a legally binding instrument that guarantees significant human control. This human control is essential for avoiding greater dehumanization of war and also to guarantee individual responsibility or accountability and the responsibility of the state. This should be established throughout the life cycle of these weapons, and we need to prohibit those in which there is no human intervention whatsoever. This complementarity is key. Today, we're called upon to reflect on the eventual harm caused by autonomous weapon systems and their social and humanitarian impact. We have the moral obligation to come up with solutions to eliminate these risks. Costa Rica hopes to move towards a regional commitment that would ensure the proper supremacy of human beings over artificial intelligence. The OAS offers an apt space for promoting dialogue and for planning the construction of a hemispheric position vis-a-vis this challenge. The topic should be addressed in a comprehensive manner as we are doing today. Aware of the potential danger of these systems, it is essential that there be regulation that is based not only on international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and a proper approach in the context of international criminal law, but that also recognizes how the indiscriminate use of these weapon systems can have a negative impact on civilian populations who may or may not be totally unconnected to armed conflicts, including multidimensional security perspective. The proliferation of such weapon systems is accompanied by risks that require that prohibitions and regulations be established to guarantee effective human control over them. The international community recognizes the urgency of coming up with a regulation to regulate systems that are already being used in different conflicts. But it's necessary that we continue engaging in dialogue in order to foster more agreements that help concretize this instrument. The longer we refrain from regulating the development, sale, transfer, and use of such systems, the more space we leave open for autonomous weapon systems to circulate freely without restrictions, and eventually they could indeed be acquired by criminal groups. The international appeal to attain this objective continues to grow and has found echo in different forums within the UN system. Several panelists have already referred to the resolution recently adopted in the First Committee of the UN General Assembly. Hence, I will only refer to the part where this resolution appeals on the Secretary General to draw up a report that will pull together the opinions of the member states with respect to such lethal weapons systems. It's important to hear the appeal by Maria Pia de Volta, one of the panelists, regarding the contribution that the OAS could make to such a report coming out of the UN. And we also note the leadership that the Committee on Hemispheric Security could have, together with the support that it could get from the Secretariat for Multidimensional Security, because this could contribute a great deal in terms of the regional approach, as we have done in the context of Central American Integration System as well. I conclude by noting that it is of the utmost importance that as a region we live in peace, but that we understand that the impact of arms transfers in this region plagued with criminal organizations must be regulated, and it is important that this be done regionally and globally. Costa Rica issues an appeal to optimize the use of this space in the context of the various political bodies of this organization, to step up the dialogue and draw in more voices to exchanges such as this. The social and humanitarian impact of autonomous weapon systems has to do not only with major arms producers or those states that have already integrated these systems as part of their defense. It is a priority of us all to prioritize and reinforce such cooperation and the partnership with international civil society organizations, academia, and other parties who are relevant and interested so as to be able to tap into their experience and their support. Chair and colleagues, I'm so sorry for going over time, but I would like to wind up my remarks by saying that the region of Latin America and the Caribbean is known as being a pioneer region committed to protecting human rights and international humanitarian law, safeguarding peace, promoting international security and disarmament are fundamental pillars of our organization. And we also need to explore how these new technologies can be geared actually at fostering development a dignified and secure life for all of our fellow citizens. Let us foster dialogue and let us act quickly to protect the well-being of our hemisphere and to safeguard security and peace in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Costa Rica. Panama is recognized. Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, allow me to congratulate the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs and the Committee on Hemispheric Affairs for hosting this joint meeting to consider challenges posed by emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems in terms of compliance with international law, including humanitarian law. I also would like to thank the panelists for the presentations that we've taken proper note of. Chair, the robots that act without human control to take away human lives is a major concern of the international community, and this is reflected in the different fora where we discuss this issue. The danger of these autonomous robots warrants an immediate and quick response for the international community. So it's not even a single definition. The academic and scientific and civil society communities define these weapons as those that target and without human intervention target humans. And so when there's an autonomous arm, you can't know what target it will attack, nor when the attack will take place, and where it will take place. And thus, the new applications of emerging technologies, such as those that are in autonomous weapons, pose challenges to peace and international security and raise new questions with regard to the role of human beings in armed conflicts. Panama views with concern each year the amount of resources that are invested in these resources, and so the sustainable development goals are left unattended, and so poverty and food insecurity, they haven't. The resources are focused on these, and there's only and it's given rise to an arms race. And we have to remember that non-state actors can come into these, in possession of these weapons as well. The Belém communiqué is the first step in the efforts of this initiative region-wide in Central American integration system with a joint statement of the foreign relations ministers. And so, in the framework of the Sahel, there was a special release statement which included 3 members of the European Union. The Caribbean organized the conference on the human impact of autonomous weapons in last September. This meeting, all of these efforts show that it's a region that we're taking concrete steps towards, Mr. Chairman. Not very long days in Geneva, Switzerland, there was a high-level meeting of the parties with regard to certain CCW, and I underscore the main result, which is a mandate to continue to work until 2026 in the government group of experts on autonomous weapon systems to continue to review and formulate, but under consensus, measures to address emerging technologies and when it comes to lethal autonomous weapons, including legal instruments without prejudice to their nature. And in view of the protocols that exist in the framework of the convention proposed by the contracting parties in line with the operational and normative rules with regard to lethal autonomous weapons. Esteemed colleagues, Panama took part and will continue to take part actively in the discussion of the government experts group and the different multilateral forum where this subject matter is discussed. Our position is clear and could be summed up by that the only timely and adequate response to be ethical and legally and security-wise is negotiating a binding legal instruments that includes the ban and specific regulations of such weapons with a preventive approach as was done for through the fourth protocol. I would not like to wrap up without saying that all the weapons system should comply with international laws, particularly the UN Charter, the international humanitarian law, and international human rights law, in addition to respecting the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution in attacks, which requires a lot of human reasoning, a high degree of this, and this should be acceptable in light of the principles of humanity and public awareness. Thank you, Panama. Mexico is recognized at this time. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to both chairs, the distinguished permanent representatives, and alternate delegates. I greet the Secretary for Multidimensional Security and the technical secretaries of both committees, as well as the officials of the General Secretariat. Good afternoon to each and every one. Mexico is grateful to the panelists for their invaluable input and whose proposals we've taken proper note of. We are grateful as well to the delegations for joining us in the proposal that we put forward together with the delegation of Costa Rica to conclude it in the resolution on international law that was approved at the last General Assembly of the OAS, so that the Committee on Hemispheric Security in the CIJP would hold this joint meeting. And because of its social and humanitarian impact, Mexico finds it fundamental to address comprehensively the challenges of emerging technologies and systems for peace and compliance with international law, particularly international humanitarian law, taking into account the specifics of each different forum and promoting exchange of ideas. This joint meeting is an excellent opportunity to assess the challenges and risks that are associated with integration with autonomous functionality in weapons system, and provides a possibility to continue to seek a joint position as a region. In the seminal report that was presented in 2013 by the Special Rapporteur for Extrajudicial Execution, there has been a more precise comprehension of the social and humanitarian impacts that are so significant that these autonomous weapon systems that affect peace and international peace and security and compliance with international law, and raises fundamental ethical issues. The accelerated advancement of this technology poses serious issues and nullifies and magnifies the effects of human intervention and the use of force. And the key issue is not whether it's possible to eliminate the human user for use of force, but rather the consequences of this removal would entail. From a legal point of view, it is highly questionable. The use of weapons that eliminates human decision-making in the application of the use of force, particularly in the context of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The principles of distinction, precaution, and attack, and proportionality require complex examinations that shouldn't be determined through simple algorithms of machines. And there are challenges with regard to the state responsibility and individual responsibility for serious violations in the commission of international crimes against humanity. The ethical considerations are also essential to determine acceptability of any weapon, including autonomous weapon systems that are in line with the principles of humanitarianism and public conscience that constitute the essence of international humanitarian law. The ethical concerns should be addressed from a perspective of not only who uses force, but also from a perspective of potential victims, especially with regard to human dignity. And in addition to these considerations, incorporating autonomous functionality in weapons system and the use of autonomous weapon system poses threats to peace and security and stability that are significant in the international ambit. And this lowers the threshold for the use of force and increases the possibility of armed conflicts, and also it's of concern with regard to asymmetric conflicts, and it compromises the objective to achieve total disarmament and universal. Delegate, the rapid militarization of artificial intelligence is tied to a renewed competition between major powers and complex security issues with potentials and changes in the balance of power. From the point of view of Latin America and the Caribbean, we're concerned about the intensification of the status quo in the North-South division, as well as its technological asymmetry that have an impact on developing countries. Mexico has advocated, together with other countries, putting in the center human decision in the use of force, human decision making, and responsibility for this decision making. Preservation of human control is crucial to prevent the dehumanization of the use of force. And therefore, we have proposed a two-pronged approach: regulations to incorporate autonomous functionality in the use of force. Based on partial discussion, Mexico believes that we should address specific challenges to autonomous weapon systems and not just use existing international law. Human participation and supervision of humans the autonomous weapon should have this throughout its life. Its useful life, and there should be a decision between the life and death of a human being and responsibility for committing crimes with autonomous weapons. This should be traceable. Therefore, it's necessary that there's traceability from the designer, producer, purchaser, and the ultimate person who has contact with the autonomous system to establish liability or responsibility when international crimes are involved, to materialize tangible results. Mexico believes it's essential to promote frank and interactive dialogue with countries from other regions and relevant stakeholders. And so we call on civil society, academia, and other indispensable stakeholders. The experience in prior humanitarian disarmament has showed that there's a need to establish effective partnerships with these partners and for their substantive and meaningful participation. Mexico hopes that the region can reach a consensus that enables us to bring into effect effective laws to meet these challenges with regard to these emerging technologies and autonomous web systems for the sake of peace and compliance and development of international humanitarian law. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mexico. Now, El Salvador is recognized. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank you and the permanent representative of Peru and the chair of the Committee on Hemispheric Security for facilitating this meeting. A recognition as well to the delegations of Mexico and Costa Rica for the leadership role that they have played with regard to this subject matter. I'd like to thank you for the presentation. That is the expert panelists to show us the current status and challenges that we face with regard to the social impact, the gap, responsibility gap, and with regard to, in terms of international law and the use of autonomous weapon system. And peace is the paramount goal of us all, and therefore we should work on an ongoing basis, reinforcing the multilateral system and make things more equitable and sustainable. Digital technologies and artificial intelligence they're here to stay, and they're changing the facts of life, offering different types of opportunities. However, they also pose greater and greater challenges when they're incompatible with international law and state conduct. The development of new technologies and the design and building of weapons, particularly autonomous ones, pose a threat to peace because these systems can reach their targets without human intervention. Just as any technology of dual use, it depends on how they're used under international law to ensure limits and rules to limit the field of action. These autonomous weapons, in using this, we must, without delay, decisively remembering the well-being and the lives of our populations and in compliance with international law and particularly international humanitarian law, we must put together these treaties. It's unacceptable that a weapon or artificial intelligence designed by men have the capacity to be programmed and decide on whether a person lives or dies or destroying property or causing psychological damage with impunity, total impunity, particularly when these technologies are under the control of non-state actors. Chair, El Salvador has been consistent in calling for establishing a legally binding instrument under the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, the CCW. We have taken a position in favor of an instrument that prohibits these autonomous weapons and to provide priority to humanitarian international law to govern this. And our proposal is reflected in a proposal we put forward with other countries from this region that we brought forward at the latest meeting of the governmental experts on emerging technologies in the area of autonomous weapons in Geneva. In this framework, El Salvador added its voice to a joint statement of regional partners, such as those in the Declaration of Belém in Costa Rica, where it was approved this year, in the framework of the humanitarian impact of autonomous weapons, as well as a special declaration on the humanitarian and social impact of these autonomous weapons that was adopted at the Ibero-American conference last month. My delegation reiterates the fact that we need to have legally binding instruments to govern this subject matter. And if we only focus on filling the voids in international humanitarian law, we wouldn't be comprehensively addressing the problem of these autonomous weapon systems. And we would be not dealing with a design, production, transfer, or use of these weapons. And there would be no human control if we address it in this way. I reiterate that this is the right time to contribute to maintaining security and peace internationally and advancing in regulations and avoiding the design and proliferation of autonomous weapons without any human control. We reaffirm the commitment of my delegation to support any action that's aimed at ensuring security regionally and nationally and internationally for the purpose of building a world that has conditions of peace worldwide. Thank you. Thank you very much, El Salvador. I give the floor to Trinidad and Tobago at this time.
Thank you, Chair. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago is pleased to be a part of this timely joint meeting of the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs and the Committee on Hemispheric Security to consider the challenges posed by emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems in terms of their compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law. I wish to express sincere appreciation for the profound insights shared by the panelists, which have made very clear the need for greater attention and collaboration among states on the very real dangers of emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems. Chair, as the lead head of government with responsibility for crime and security in the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, quasi-cabinet, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been actively involved in discussions regarding the use of autonomous weapon systems. Trinidad and Tobago recognizes the enormous threat posed to the lives of civilians with the indiscriminate use of autonomous weapons and the attendant implications for international law and international humanitarian law. For this reason, Trinidad and Tobago participated in the Latin American and Caribbean Conference on the Social and Humanitarian Impact of Autonomous Weapons, which was held in Costa Rica on February 23rd and 24th, 2023. As a direct outcome of that meeting, the Belém communique was issued, which affirms the need for countries to collaborate to promote the urgent negotiation of an international legally binding instrument with prohibitions and regulations with regard to autonomy in weapon systems. Noting the importance of an international legally binding instrument to address the regulation of the use of autonomous weapon systems, the Office of the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, in collaboration with the CARICOM Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, IMPACTS, SOCA, GACAI International, and Stop Killer Robots, hosted a two-day regional conference on September 5th and 6th, 2023, on the human impacts of AWS. The conference highlighted the detrimental implications for the national security of CARICOM member states and the potential risks associated with their use by non-state actors, including criminal groups, terrorists, and gangs. Consequently, Trinidad and Tobago supported the Declaration on Autonomous Weapon Systems, which was issued at the conclusion of the conference, and called for the urgent pursuit of an internationally legally binding instrument incorporating prohibitions and regulations on autonomous weapon systems. As I close, Chair, I wish to reiterate Trinidad and Tobago's support for a legally binding instrument that ensures accountability, respect for the dignity of the human person, and the safety and security of our citizens. We wish to see the Caribbean and Latin American region remain as a zone of peace and will continue to support all efforts to ensure that this objective is realized. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago.
Brazil is recognized now. Thank you very much, chairs of the Committee on Juridical and Political, Sebastian Kolovich, and the chair of the Committee on Hemispheric Security, for hosting this meeting. We'd also like to recognize the leading role played by Mexico and Costa Rica. And also I'd like to thank the panelists for their participation this afternoon. I would like to make a brief comment about the challenges of these emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems in terms of the growing visibility and relevance. We know that it's particularly complex with regard to legal and security and human rights and ethical issues. And just the simple role of by humans of force and human control over the machine. This is more and more obvious that this is an important issue, and that the international human rights law and international law will also be at the center to analyze the legality of these technologies and weapons in the context of armed conflicts, and specifically with regard to lethal autonomous weapons. As we know, their possible regulation of such system under the Convention on the CCW, a group of government experts on lethal autonomous weapons recently met. Flavio D'Amico, a representative of Brazil, took part at this in Geneva, and there were important results achieved under consensus at that meeting. The understanding of And so we have to work on behalf of limiting such system. And in the framework of this convention, there has to be it has to be approved by the highest number of countries, particularly those who produce this technology. And it must be effective and must be comprehensive. We also notice and we're very happy that the draft resolution on this at the first committee at the General Assembly of the UN and the rapporteur has been entrusted by the member nations to seek the support of the International Red Cross, Committee of the Red Cross, and civil society to deal with these autonomous lethal autonomous weapons. And there's been the contracting parties in Geneva of the convention meant that 2025 they're going to deal with this, and Brazil will be part of this and has great expectations for this. There's a more conservative view of some of the members of that group. We think there has to be a coordination, and we have to work together to have an ambitious product to come out with regard to these autonomous lethal weapons. And we have to come up with a legally binding instrument. In addition to this global discussion, this subject at the OAS, we have to deal with the impact of these types of weapon systems to the members of members of this organization in our region. The potential regional efforts will make it able for us to join efforts and to pool together the expertise that we have and come up with a proper solution in our discussion. Brazil is committed to these processes that have been underway about these weapons, and we hope that the efforts made at the OAS can contribute more to advancement in these negotiations. Thank you very much.
I thank the ambassador of Brazil for his statement. We now give the floor to the representative of Guatemala. Thank you, Chair. The delegation of Guatemala is grateful for the efforts made to prepare this unprecedented joint session with the Committee on Hemispheric Security and the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs, dedicated to considering the challenges imposed by emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems when it comes to compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law. We welcome and are thankful for the reflections and contributions shared by the various special guests. Guatemala, as a high contracting party to the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, participates in and closely follows the discussions unfolding in the group of governmental experts on emerging technologies in the context of lethal autonomous weapon systems. And like many other states, we consider that the results attained thus far are not a clear reflection of do not reflect the vigorous concerns that delegations such as our own share. Guatemala reiterates that it is in the context of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons that the states must urgently agree upon the need to negotiate a legally binding international instrument that would include the participation of all relevant actors, at the same time guaranteeing observance of the international rules that apply, as well as respect for humanitarian ethical canons. Chair, we regret that the meeting of the high contracting parties of the held in November of this year concluded without having reached a mandate to formalize a new protocol on autonomous weapons systems. In the context of that convention, autonomous weapon systems are being developed at a very fast pace, given the development of technology, constituting a true danger to humankind. International humanitarian law is lagging behind because of the slow process of adapting it so as to correspond to the dynamic and fast-paced acceleration. Mindful of this, I would like to highlight two considerations that I think have been common in these discussions. The first is that when one considers these weapons as emerging threats, they need to be very carefully evaluated as stipulated in Article 36 of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions. and determining whether their use would be prohibited by that treaty or by any other provision of international law, looking at the very least, at the principles of distinction, proportionality, humanity, and military necessity, all basic principles of IHL. Likewise, we highlight that Article 91 of the Additional Protocol 1 related to responsibility, that responsibility attaches to the party that actually violates the provisions of the Geneva Conventions and their protocols, but it indicates that it is for acts committed by persons who are part of their armed forces. In other words, international criminal responsibility cannot be attributed to a weapon that acts autonomously. This failing could leave a serious legal gap that would have a negative impact on the operation of international humanitarian law. The moral and ethical problem posed by the use of autonomous weapon system is no small thing. Any instrument negotiated on such weapons must include an express prohibition on any weapon operated autonomously be the one to decide on the life or death of a person. The tie-in with human decision-making in military operations is fundamental. Guatemala considers that the analyses of the challenges posed by artificial intelligence today, specifically when it comes to autonomous weapon systems and their potential social and humanitarian impact, must incorporate a perspective of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, compatible with existing standards without weakening or calling into question such provisions. We consider the 7th conference to review the CCAC, which will not be held until 2026, would be an appropriate forum for the community of, well, the Americas should continue to strengthen their participation or our participation, sending resolutions that would be in favor of developing a new protocol in the context of that convention. Moreover, bearing in mind that at this time there are no specific mandates on artificial intelligence and security, we suggest that this issue be considered in the academic activities that are going to be carried out by the Committee on Hemispheric Security in the first half of 2024. This could lay out a new roadmap for approaching this topic in our committees. Based on what we have said, we once again are very pleased, and we thank the chair of the Committee on Hemispheric Security and the chair of the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs for holding this joint session, and we support the continuation of these discussions in the context of the Committee on Hemispheric Security, sharing initiatives that would contribute to negotiations in Geneva. Finally, Chair, my delegation considers it especially important to recall that Latin America and the Caribbean play a very important role in this analysis worldwide, thereby contributing to promoting international peace and security. Thank you very much. We thank the representative of Guatemala, and we now give the floor to the representative of the Dominican Republic. Thank you very much, Chair. We'd like to begin our remarks by thanking each of the presenters for their presentations today. No doubt they have given us a much clearer view of just what are the challenges that we face when we talk about emerging technologies and automatic weapon systems, and where we need to go in this regard. In analyzing this topic, it's essential that we address the topic of state responsibility, about which Ms. Viveros Alvarez has written extensively. Responsibility is expressed in the legal complexity of attributing responsibility for the action of these autonomous weapon systems, where international law requires a clear nexus with human activity, but the operation of these technologies creates a dissonance between technology and the legal framework. The states are not exempted from ethical responsibility, even though the legal burden may be diffused, yet it's not non-existent. And so the ethical mandate to prevent harm from these technologies is crystal clear. state responsibility with respect to the potential risk by these autonomous systems means that there's an ethical gap that needs to be filled with preventive measures. That's where we, the states, have the greatest responsibility. This ethical dilemma finds its most acute expression in the violation of international humanitarian law. The autonomous use of weapons is itself a violation of fundamental norms. This violation would not only entail responsibility in the context of international conflicts, it also opens the door to abuses at the national level, threatening the human rights of citizens who trust in protection by the states. As part of the practices taken on by the Dominican Republic to ensure adequate and efficient use of emerging technologies, we can mention the approval of the National Artificial Intelligence Policy 2030, which was published on October 11th of this year. That strategy established as a framework for integral action for promoting artificial intelligence. As noted by one of the three pillars, with this initiative, the idea is to establish solid governance of AI, guaranteeing policies that ensure the responsible and ethical use of technologies in the public sector. In calling for a collective analysis, we call on all actors internationally to ensure that the use of emerging technologies, particularly AI, will support and improve human development rather than operating to its detriment. Thank you very much. We thank the representative of the Dominican Republic for her remarks, and we now give the floor to the representative of Chile. Thank you very much, Chair. I thank both chairs and all the panelists who have made presentations this afternoon. It's great to be able to bring together the work of both committees in order to address this topic, which is of such importance and continuing to unfold, as is the question of lethal autonomous weapon systems. I'd like to begin by reiterating that Chile's position with respect to lethal autonomous weapon systems is based on the application of international humanitarian law. This means that we, the states, are obligated to ensure that these new technologies are used in a manner that complies with the guiding principles of international humanitarian law. As indicated by other delegations in their presentations, the principle of distinction, the principle of proportionality, and the precautionary principle. It is precisely because of the autonomous nature of these weapons that means that it will be a machine that chooses the target and uses force without human intervention. It's because of this that the system needs to be able to distinguish the different actors involved in a conflict so that autonomous weapons can actually comply with the principles of distinction, precaution, and proportionality. This requires more than a simple algorithm, as the panelists also said. To understand the difference between a combatant and a combatant out of combat, one must understand the context. That will require that these systems operate with a certain degree of artificial intelligence. For this reason, and as was mentioned in the presentations, among the main difficulties caused by the use of AI in these circumstances has to do with the lack of predictability. It would be very difficult to comply with Article 36 of the Geneva Conventions without predictability in the use of weapons. There must be certainty with respect to the capacity of these to comply with international human rights, humanitarian law norms. Therefore, Chile considers that lethal autonomous weapon systems that are unpredictable in terms of their result or whose operations cannot be explained must be prohibited. We need to bear in mind that international humanitarian law prohibits weapons that cause superfluous, unnecessary suffering or harm, and it requires that new weapons, their study, development, acquisition, must be subject to a review to determine whether their use in certain conditions, in all circumstances, would be prohibited by international humanitarian law. Such regulations should consider the technical performance of autonomous weapons systems regarding the claimed and possible targets and activities. Just because they're autonomous, it doesn't mean they're going to violate these regulations, even though there might be they might adopt many forms. It's impossible to know how they can not cause superfluous harm, which would be prohibited by international humanitarian law. We face several challenges and definitions yet to be established with respect to autonomous weapon systems, such as the implications of significant human control, which was mentioned by Costa Rica, and the very definition of autonomy. These are topics that need to continue to be addressed in the context of the United Nations. For Chile, the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons is the appropriate framework for regulating lethal autonomous weapon systems. With that, assure a greater universality both for carrying out the negotiation and for subsequent implementation. For this reason, given the possibility of adopting a binding legal instrument specific to these systems, Chile thinks that it should be negotiated as part of an additional protocol to the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. To conclude, I reiterate that Chile will continue to participating with a great commitment in the UN debate on this topic, and we are grateful to the delegations of Mexico and Costa Rica for the initiative in respect of this valuable session. Thank you very much.
Nos atacan.
We're being attacked.
Tenemos cortinas autónomas.
We have autonomous shades. Very well. We thank the delegation of Chile for your remarks, and we now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Good afternoon, all. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the missions of Mexico and Costa Rica for this important initiative, and also today's panelists for the insightful discussion that we had today. Mr. Chair, Canada believes that discussions about lethal and autonomous weapon systems should focus on following rules of international humanitarian law. Humans should have ultimate control over the automation system, allowing autonomy only within limits set by humans. Canada has consistently opposed fully autonomous weapon systems, arguing that some degree of autonomy in weapon systems is acceptable, but it should always maintain appropriate human involvement. Canada is supportive of efforts rooted in international humanitarian law and human rights-based approaches to establish norms and guardrails for the responsible use of artificial intelligence and autonomy in military context. We have been an active participant and supporter of the group of governmental experts on lethal autonomous weapon systems, or laws, within the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, or CCW. Through this multilateral forum, Canada has advanced a number of key priorities and interests, such as the importance of compliance with international humanitarian law at all stages of a weapon system lifecycle, the need to address the risk of inherent biases in autonomous systems, and the importance of appropriate human involvement. The CCW met on November 15 to 17 to discuss a new mandate for laws for the group of governmental experts in 2024. Our capital is very interested and engaged in this topic, and we will be discussing next steps. We also recognize the growing frustrations from the pro-ban states and from civil society. Recently, there have been a number of parallel initiatives outside the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. This includes a seminar in Costa Rica, as it was stated prior, in February 2023. In a similar vein, we are also taking note of the rise in discussions around laws taking place within the UN General Assembly, with a resolution specifically on laws being put forward this year. We also note a reference to laws within the new Agenda for Peace, or NA4P. Canada remains steadfast in advocating for responsible and ethical guidelines within international frameworks concerning emerging technologies, lethal and autonomous weapon systems, prioritizing appropriate human involvement and compliance with international humanitarian law. We look forward to further discussions on this topic within this forum. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Canadá.
Thank you, Canada. Colombia is recognized. Thank you very much, Chair. Colombia has been emphasizing in the relevant fora the following aspects around the discussion that brings us together this afternoon. First of all, lethal autonomous weapon systems lack the ability to adequately apply the principle of distinction or the principle of proportionality, which are basics of international humanitarian law. Even though artificial intelligence may have the capacity to identify military targets through their programming, the capacity to distinguish between a combatant and a non-combatant, and between a military target and a civilian target that it would be protected at the time of the attack, corresponds only to a human operator with the proper training in the rules that govern armed conflict. The capacity for applying the principle of proportionality is even more exclusive to humans, but it requires an additional test. After the determination that the target to be attacked is, in effect, a lawful military target, the commander must analyze, in every case, whether incidental harm to persons or civilian property are or are not proportional to the direct military advantage that is hoped to be obtained on attacking. This is especially important, moreover, because the obligations imposed by international humanitarian law apply to states, to the parties in conflict, and to the individuals who participate in the hostilities. In no case is international humanitarian law applicable to the autonomous behavior of a machine. As a result, responsibility for violation of these obligations may correspond solely to the states, the parties in conflict, and the individual perpetrators of violators of international humanitarian law. The use of lethal autonomous weapon systems could make it impossible for there to be individual criminal responsibility of perpetrators. Now, in the context of the obligations that arise from the principles of distinction and proportionality, it's important to bear in mind the provisions of the special clause that establishes that in the absence of regulation in a given area related to armed conflicts, the parties in conflict and civilians must be protected by the principles of international law, the laws of humankind, and the dictates of public conscience. This implies not only that that which is not regulated is not ipso facto permitted, but rather it also requires that new technological developments must comply with the minima of humanity and compatibility with the public conscience. In that regard, it is not possible for autonomous weapon systems, lethal autonomous weapon systems, to apply the principles of humanity because that depends on exclusively human characteristics such as compassion and the ability to protect. Having said this, no consideration from a technical standpoint for developing new weapons, including those that integrate artificial intelligence, can be contrary to international law. It is also necessary that in carrying out military operations, one guarantee the existence of a clear chain of command that makes it possible to assign responsibility for the operation to a human being. It cannot be allowed to have such responsibility diluted through the use of artificial intelligence or the autonomy of the means used. Moreover, it is of the utmost interest that efficient physical and cybernetic security be established around these weapon systems so as to reduce the risk of their loss of control or proliferation events that would enable non-state actors to gain access to such systems. Mr. Chairman, Colombia is promoting initiatives aimed at establishing a regulatory framework through international law that determines the scope of the development of autonomous weapon systems, particularly when one speaks of total autonomy in their cycle. For example, Colombia endorsed the communique of the Latin American and Caribbean Conference on the impact of autonomous weapon systems held in Costa Rica. Plus, in the context of the group of experts on autonomous weapon systems, Colombia joined a group of 14 countries who are promoting the negotiation of an additional protocol, the sixth protocol, to ensure significant human control, avoid practices that perpetuate or expand social prejudices, including racial or gender prejudice, see to it that they not cause lasting harm to the environment, and draw up regulations to create registries on their manufacture. Finally, while the discussion about international law aspects are worked out, it is clear that Colombia, according priority to life, will not develop or use any lethal autonomous weapon systems. Thank you very much. Thank you, Colombia. Paraguay has the floor. Thank you very much, Chair, the delegation of the Republic of Paraguay is grateful to the delegations of Costa Rica and Mexico for their initiative on bringing this key topic to this joint session, being clear on the new risks posed to peace and security by these systems, including legal, technical, and ethical concerns that they raise. Autonomous weapon systems entail the risk of further dehumanizing armed conflict. Their use could be reduced to a mere mathematical operation without being mindful of their humanitarian and social impact. Mr. Chairman, Paraguay is a party to the Convention on Prohibition and Restriction of Certain Conventional Weapons that could be considered excessively harmful or to have indiscriminate effects, and the 5 protocols adopted by law in 2004 and 2013. So we celebrate the efforts on the part of the group of government experts on emerging technologies in the area of lethal autonomous weapon systems and the impetus being given to this topic in different multilateral spaces. For example, Resolution 5122 of the Human Rights Council on the repercussions for human rights of the new emerging technologies in the military area, which was adopted by consensus on October 7th, 2022. We also note that 164 member states, including Paraguay, voted in favor last November 1st in the first committee of the UN General Assembly in favor of a draft resolution on autonomous or lethal autonomous weapon systems. Paraguay observes very closely initiatives to establish limits on the use of lethal autonomous weapon systems, such as what has been pushed by the ICRC, mindful of the speed with which such weapons are being developed, as well as the ethical issues posed by their use. Mr. Chairman, our region is a region of peace and the first to be declared as a nuclear weapons-free area under the Treaty of Tlatelolco. So moving towards a similar regulation in this area is looked upon very favorably by Paraguay, considering that arms races draw resources away from the most urgent problems. To conclude, we believe that our region can be at the vanguard of this challenge and be an example for other regions as sending a sign regarding the signal of the importance of setting limits to these new systems which could have such a negative impact on human life. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paraguay. Peru is recognized. Thank you very much, Chairman. The delegation of Peru would like to express gratitude to the delegations of Costa Rica and Mexico for their initiative to organize this joint session to reflect on the challenges imposed by emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems. We also would like to thank the panelists for their presentations in this session. Peru reiterates its concern shared by the UN Secretary General in the new Agenda for Peace regarding the need to update our vision of disarmament in the face of the accelerated development of emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence and the possible interaction between this and nuclear weapons, technology, and so forth. While we are aware of the possibility of drawing on artificial intelligence in order to improve the actions of the international community when it comes to peace and security, we also verify the serious threats and risks that their use can give rise to. Mr. Chairman, Peru is committed to promoting peace, security, and human rights in our region. We believe that the social and humanitarian impact of autonomous weapon systems poses a critical challenge that needs to be taken on in a joint and decisive manner. The expansion of the military industry means a revolution in how war is waged and poses serious ethical, humanitarian, legal, and security issues due to the possibility of working against the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law and human rights. Likewise, in the framework of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, Peru is promoting and actively participating in the various groups of or in the work of the group of governmental experts on emerging technologies and lethal autonomous weapon systems so as to negotiate a legally binding instrument on this topic. Reflecting the growing convergence of the international community, Peru joined the joint statement of states at the 78th General Assembly of the United Nations, which consolidates key elements of the international response that is urgently needed regarding autonomous weapon systems. In this context, it's fundamental that we continue examining the impact of autonomous weapon systems in our region, where peace and security are fundamental pillars for sustainable development. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peru. The observer mission of France has the floor. Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the floor. I would like, first of all, to thank your Peruvian colleague and the delegations of Costa Rica and Mexico for their commitment to this very important topic. This meeting, the holding of this meeting, is key and reflects the important role of the region in the debate on autonomous weapon systems. France considers that respecting international law, especially international humanitarian law, should continue to be fully applied to all weapon systems, including the development and use of lethal autonomous weapons. We need to draw a distinction between those autonomous weapon systems that are incompatible with international humanitarian law and those lethal autonomous weapon systems that have some autonomy, but that can be developed and used in a manner compatible with international humanitarian law. The first should not be developed or used, and the international community should be committed to prohibiting those lethal autonomous weapon systems that operate with no human control and with no human chain of command. As regards the second, the states should reach an understanding on a series of principles aimed at guiding the development of national policy and measures to be implemented to accompany the use of any such systems. Chairman, France is convinced of the relevance of this approach that several have mentioned here, and this approach should continue guiding the group of governmental experts that has been established under the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. We find with great interest that the great majority of delegations have used this twofold approach to respond to this, and that respect for international humanitarian law and maintaining human control are at the essence of this approach. France considers that the best chance of coming up with an effective international framework is to pursue the process that has been undertaken by the group of governmental experts that has been established under the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. The convention continues to be the relevant international forum for responding to the ethical and legal challenges that have been mentioned here and that are raised by weapon systems based on emerging technologies. The convention sets forth the necessary conditions for addressing these challenges thanks to its universality and its inclusive nature with the participation of civil society and academia. It's the only framework in which it is possible to propose measures that will be universal and therefore implemented by those states that might be capable of developing autonomous weapon systems. We're convinced that if we continue working together, we can make tangible and concrete progress in the context of the Convention, drawing on the convergence of the applicability of international humanitarian law, the need to preserve accountability and human control, and the obligation to be accountable. We salute the reinforced mandate of the group of governmental experts after the latest meeting of the high contracting parties. In mid-November, we also salute the adoption of the resolution set forth by Austria and co-sponsored by Costa Rica, Mexico, Trinidad and Tobago, and one other country regarding autonomous weapon systems at the UN General Assembly, First Committee, last November 1st, and that also calls for a report by the UN Secretary General on this topic. France will contribute to such report and encourages all states, particularly the high contracting parties, to the convention to respond to that call. We will continue to be mobilized in respect to this topic as AI disseminates more widely in our societies with absolute respect for international humanitarian law and with full cooperation with all of our partners in the Americas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, France. And I'd like to thank all the states for their participation in the dialogue. I now give the floor to the chair of the Committee on Hemispheric Security, Ambassador Gustavo Adriansen. Thank you very much, Chair. It's particularly gratifying to address you to close out this joint session where we had the opportunity to comprehensively look at and in depth of these emerging technologies and autonomous weapon systems and deal with the fundamental that have come up. But first, I'd like to express my gratitude to each and every one of you for your participation, your committed participation when it comes to this utterly important topic. And I'd like to thank each and every one of the panelists for sharing their experience and expertise, and the delegates of the member states for engaging in an invaluable dialogue, and everybody who's been present here and joined virtually for your dedication and interest in this important subject in terms of peace. And we have been providing a clear and critical picture of the challenges we're facing in this area. We've also explored the impact of artificial intelligence in the military settings and the paramount need, compelling need to find a way for these technologies to be used responsibly and in keeping with international humanitarian law. The presentation of Romina, who's a ICRC advisor, enabled us to learn from a humanitarian perspective the challenges that we face. Jimena Vivero Alvarez, the high-level panel of the UN on artificial intelligence, and Ms. Munoz, who's a senior consultant with regard to human rights, provided us an overall and detailed view of the ethical and legal dilemmas that we face. And also the presence here of Maria Pia Devoto and the Human Network for Latin America and the Caribbean enabled us to see the regional approach and the challenges we're facing and what we have to overcome, as well as the virtual participation of Bernard Duane of the University of Quebec, enriched from academia and the expert that he is this meeting. And then all of the member states have also, we've heard a wide range of opinions and views that, no question, lead us to ask us the question, what's the best way to address these challenges we face? It's obvious that we need an approach of collaboration and multilateralism to be able to be effective in diversity when it comes to perspectives, enriches our understanding, and shows us that we have to work together to be able to come up with responses to provide an international human rights law-based response. Now we have to discuss how important it is and set about the text to come up with this binding legal instrument and deal with the ethical issues of these weapon systems. As chair of the Committee on Hemispheric Security, I would like to reaffirm the importance of continuing with this dialogue in the future to promote cooperation between our countries, to promote these challenges and address them together with solidarity. The regional solidarity doesn't only mean our own territories, but the protection of human rights and preservation of peace throughout our entire region. To give control of decision-making when it comes to algorithms and computers and machines entails of deep ethical issues and concerns. To make decisions about whether human beings live or die is, without any question, is one of the major dilemmas that we face in this new technological paradigm. As the international community, we have to address these emerging technologies. It's imperative for us to work hand in hand in a responsible fashion to develop adequate legal frameworks to be able to address these new technology, regulate them, and provide protection to human rights and respect for international humanitarian law. I'd like to wrap up, Chair, to say that in this new context, we'd like to urge active participation in these efforts to all member states, civil society, and academia. This task we're facing is complex, but we can come up with solutions to promote peace and security. I reiterate our gratitude, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. If there's no further, we take note of the comments of the states as well as the panelists' presentations. Before we close out, I want to remind you that we're going to have a brief CIJP session as soon as we finish, so please remain seated. I would like to, because we have a quorum, if you move, you will destroy our quorum, and this is just a brief meeting that we'll have. So without further ado, we close this at 5:07 p.m. In 30 seconds, we will begin the next meeting. Thank you. Please remain seated for this brief regular session of the CIJP.